Yeah, I guess we'll just get started. And as you can see, I'm not used to doing this, so kind of a learning process for me, kind of experimental. I was just going to record this for people who have the lifetime membership. Let me pause this. I was going to record this for people who have the video series, and then I thought I'd just try doing the Twitch thing. So this will be pretty free form, and I'm just going to go through and look at a few hands in particular from this Cate Hall, Mike Dentale grudge match, as they were calling it. So this will be pretty informal, and we'll be talking about a lot of stuff. Some of it might not be the most, the best stuff or the most accurate stuff, but we might, get a little meandering, um, more so than in more planned out videos. And I'm not sure I'll be able to get to all the questions that happened during it. So if you have a good one and I don't answer it, just ask it again at the end, and I'll spend time at the end talking to as long as we can at the very end more. So yeah, apology about the audio. I was hoping to have that more set up a little bit better. All right. So let's get into it. Let me just go to the first hand that I want to talk about here. And I'll probably try to bring the audio up while I play it and then talk about it occasionally throughout.
Some trips, you get out of hand like ace-4, so you can have some diamond hands.
You really think there's a big difference between ace-4 and ace-7?
Yeah, it's a huge difference. Because bluffs, 6-7, 6.
You have better equity versus those straight draw bluffs.
With ace-7
over.
But
coordinated healthcare to low income. I would be tempted to call when someone.
I think whenever they talk.
Oh, 1 second. I'm at the wrong spot. It's off to a good start.
Doug, we're not allowed to do all three options. He just snap calls it? Oh my god.
So this starts out with Dentale raised with 6-4, and then Hall 3-bet him with 5-3, and he just kind of snap calls, right? And as we know, snap calls generally are medium strength or weak hands. That's pretty obvious here from the context. Like he's not going to be unlikely. He's going to be snap calling with a high pair or whatever. Obviously, this is a lot weaker than most people snap call a 3-bet with. Not much more to say about it than that.
He's got to snap it off.
He doesn't even. This is just.
All right, we got poker in the streets here, guys.
Yeah, this is
the highest card.
6 high to 5 high.
The highest card someone has right now is a 6.
Hey, but they are suited. They got that going.
That's
for them.
true, and only one gap.
Yeah, but I mean, like this is a giant amount of Dentale's stack, and this is one of the leaks that I think he has. And they flop nothing, so I like Cate's chances of winning the spot.
This is kind of interesting. Cate checks pretty quick, and so does Mike, and you can hear Mike in the background before she's even checked, saying something like, "Oh, did she check?" I just think it's so unlikely, with the quick check back from him and him talking while it's her turn to act. It's just so unlikely that he's got a strong hand here. So if I was Cate, it would make me feel, pretty comfortable thinking that, if I was afraid of him flopping a set or whatever, or having an overpair, I think those hands have become a lot less likely, when he quick checks back the flop, especially on the, that's especially the case on the two-tone or the suited board, with the 2 diamonds. How likely is it if he had a strong hand that he would just snap check back and not at least consider betting on that board? Yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to say. I also think Cate's check is pretty quick too, but at the same time, I don't think that's as meaningful because some players who do hit very well will check back. Like if she had a set here, she might snap check. You do see that sometimes, so I don't think it's as meaningful as Dentale, who has the more incentive to think about bluffing here. When she checks back, and she could easily have ace king or whatever. Yeah, that's pretty much it there. I also think, this is early on in the hand. This is 17 minutes in, and I think the total time is like a 4-hour thing altogether. And Mike has a lot of quick checkbacks throughout the game, throughout the match. There's a lot of spots where you just get the sense, even in small or fairly large pots like this, that he's just kind of like, Not going to be firing. I think the thing you can tell about quick checkbacks in general, like as far as like a meta interpretation of somebody's game, is like they're really not thinking about making a lot of bluffs, right? Like that's the shorthand information it gives you about their general where their head's at. Like if Mike was in the mood to be, or if he was, if he was thinking about trying to take away a lot of pots, he'd be thinking more in these spots. And there's just a lot of spots where he's just like snap checking back, and that's part of his style too. He's kind of quirky. He does weird, quick movements. But I still think, having watched this whole series, he's pretty imbalanced in those spots because there's spots where he does have more of a hand and has more of incentive to think about betting than he does. So those are just different things. I think you can pull some meaning out of that in different ways. All right. Go to a later hand here. This is a hand where, Dentale hits. He's going to hit trip fives on the river. Pretty small pot, but then he overbets it on the river and has some interesting behaviors on the river. And I'm trying to focus on behaviors that I've found to be pretty meaningful for these players as I watched this and took notes on it. So
I didn't even know that game was happening.
I know you're. Not,
I was just playing poker. What was I thinking?
You were just drinking.
I was also just.
We
drinking.
were drinking a lot.
There was a lot of alcohol. Jeremy, man, he goes hard in the paint.
Shout out to Sugar House hooking us up with all that free, nice,
absolutely
top shelf liquor.
It was
only
the good
best
stuff
for us.
It was actually the good stuff.
It was the stuff that Phil Helmy drinks regularly. That's how good it is.
And after you fold, I'm going to show you a deuce.
Oh.
Okay, so yeah, and people who are familiar with my stuff, this is probably kind of obvious stuff too, because lots of people have said that Mike was a pretty big, tell box in this match, whether he knows that or not. But Mike snap bets the river for an overbet of 1,000 into 600, and then he says, "When you fold, I'll show you a deuce." Basically implying like I don't have much, So not only is that's a weak hand statement from a bettor, which if you read my Verbal Poker Tells book, that a weak hand statement weakening a bettor's range is usually going to be a strong hand. Bluffers don't usually do that, and then you also have kind of the goadingness of it. Like I'm going to show you a deuce when you fold. Bluffers just aren't going to usually want to irritate their opponent like that. It's kind of obvious stuff, but it holds up quite well, in all these kinds of spots. Let's see. We'll keep playing it, see if he says anything else.
Oh man!
Mike double checks his cards there too after betting, which double checking cards from a player who's made a significant bet is usually going to be relaxation, and that's keeping in mind that's a different situation than a player double checking their cards like, when they're checking or when they're calling or whatever. I'm talking about just double checking associated with a pretty significant bet. And Mike has this like a super reliable way in this match. Like he's constantly, very frequently checking his cards when he's betting a strong hand, and he virtually never does it when he's betting a weak hand. Like there was a few early hand spots like standard small bet kind of C bet kind of stuff, but like basically no like decent sized turn or river bets where he double checked his cards, right before or after betting. And then one hand later we'll look at he double checked his cards like 4 times in one, as Cate was thinking about her decision. So that kind of thing, when you correlate it to a specific player, it can be really meaningful. It's one of the things I try to watch for. Some people are going to be balanced. Some people check their cards a lot, to be balanced, and I do that sometimes too. Like have certain places I'll check it to be balanced, but I think for Mike and for a lot of people, it's not balanced. Okay, another interesting thing here is, the first time this was the first behaviorally interesting hand in this match. It was like 30 minutes in, where Mike, did a little speech on the river and goaded her and all that. So I think the interesting point about that is the first time somebody does something unusual like this, like an abnormal behavior when they make a decent sized bet, the first time in a match between strangers that somebody does this. It's even more likely than usual to indicate relaxation. Just because, while a player might theoretically switch it up later in the match when they get more comfortable, or when they might think about switching it up, if the first time they do something, though, they're going to have a strong hand almost always, and that's just because a bluffer is not going to want to do some weird thing the first time with a bluff and run the risk of somebody just interpreting that badly. Most players are going to want to use that first time. They want to do that weird activity with a strong hand first to at least establish or theoretically establish that they're doing that kind of stuff with a strong hand, as it kind of protects them for doing it later with weaker hands. And I've seen that kind of thing from Phil Hellmuth, where Phil Hellmuth would do something weird the first time in a match, and then later against a decent player he might switch it up because he knows that his opponents saw that, or sometimes they'll even show it. Sometimes players show it too. If it doesn't get shown, it doesn't get called. People like to have that first weird behavior covered, kind of covered by, insured by having a strong hand, if that makes sense. Hope that's making sense. Kind of hard to describe. But it struck me about this because even though Mike doesn't really switch it up at all, it's interesting to notice, if you're at all uncertain about this kind of thing, that very first time is just almost always going to be a strong hand for the weird behavior. I'll keep watching this. I think there might be something else in here.
This is great, man. I mean, I don't always agree with a lot of the
Notice
stuff he
how-
does on Twitter, and
Notice how Mike is.
What are your thoughts on?
He's repeating it again, and also just notice how much how much Mike is looking at Cate. He keeps looking at her and looking back and looking at her, staring at her, and repeating his goading statement. That kind of thing, the eye contact thing, is another kind of level of interaction that people with strong hands will usually have when they're betting strong hands. Keep in mind we're talking about bet-related tells here, not to be confused with when somebody's waiting for an opponent to act or whatever, or just checking. We're talking about the most reliable kinds of tells, which are bet-related tells. And in this hand, one second, I'm getting a message. In this hand, Mike just has a lot of eye contact with Cate, and he does that in some other hands where he has strong hands too. And you'll notice when we look at some of his weak hand bets, he's much more reserved and quiet and looking down at the table and not looking towards her as much. So that can be a pattern. And keep in mind, the lack of eye contact doesn't mean that much. It's the eye contact that really indicates relaxation. Assuming you've noticed this about a player, people have different patterns with eye contact. Some bluffers stare more when they're bluffing. But I think that Mike is showing what I think is the more common pattern. He interacts more verbally, he interacts more with eye contact when he's relaxed and has a strong hand because he's comfortable. Let's move on.
Cate Hall's line here, checking back flop.
Cate Hall has actually a pretty good bluff catching hand.
Really? I think it blocks a lot of
Sorry,
straights.
checks down. No,
Yeah, it checked down.
But
And he bet us.
there's no straights though.
Let's go back and just watch it. Watch the very initial part when he bet. Let me see. Just watch it
The
again.
reverse tell versus him.
On the
And
river.
I trapped him with his, and he only got it in with the second nuts.
Man, I didn't even know that game was happening.
I know, you're not.
I was just playing poker. What was I thinking?
You were just drinking.
I was also just.
We
drinking.
were drinking a lot.
There
It
was
was awesome.
there was a lot of alcohol. Jeremy, man, he goes hard in the paint.
Shout out to Sugar House for hooking us up with all that free, nice,
Absolutely.
top shelf liquor.
It was
Only
the, good
the best
stuff.
for us,
It
yeah.
was actually the good stuff.
It was the stuff that Phil Hellmuth drinks
Yeah.
regularly. That's
Yeah.
how good it is.
I don't know if you noticed his very slight upward kind of palms up gesture right before he reaches for
Because
chips.
of all that
It
free,
just
nice,
looks so
absolutely
relaxed
top
to me.
shelf liquor.
It was
Only
the good
the best
stuff.
for us,
It
yeah.
was actually the good stuff.
It was the stuff that Phil Hellmuth drinks
Yeah.
regularly.
He kind of has this kind of shrug gesture before he reaches for chips, where he has his palm up in the air, and any kind of shrug palms up gestures are from a bettor are going to be tied to relaxation. It's just kind of it's a very subtle I don't know gesture, and we'll see him again later. He has a hand that's more obvious, where he has a couple really obvious palms up gestures, and it's just like it's like a snippet of those are all like elements of a shrug, right? A shrug's made up of palms up, it's made up of shoulders going up, head tilt. But even when you see any of those by themselves, even it can be a sign that somebody's relaxed. And usually if he was bluffing here, I think we'd see him be much more reserved and serious looking, and his body language would be more straightforward. Just watch a few more seconds, see if I forgot anything.
Regularly. That's
Yeah.
how good it is.
And after you
Dentale-
fold, I'm going to show you a deuce.
Oh!
Yeah, just it's such an aggressive kind of immediate bet. And we'll watch some other immediate snap bets from Mike later in the match where he announces the bet here, but we'll look at some ones where he just grabs a stack and puts it out without even counting like right away. And those are tied to being relaxed and having a strong hand too. All right, moving on. Okay.
Don't do it. 1,000.
Oh! It's good.
So this is kind of a funny one. So he's kind of goading or daring Cate to raise. So he says, "Is this live?" Well, the event's not live, but I myself am live. Yeah. So he's saying to Cate, "Don't do it, don't do it," and then she raises, and then he immediately snapped 3 bets to 1,000, like with a pretty big raise there. I can't remember what Cate raised to. Maybe it'll show me right here. Oh yeah, she raised to 300 and he raised to 1,000. Yeah, so pretty big raise there. And let's see, I think Sean Deeb says something about this right here.
Yeah, that's kind of a live pro thing. Someone like trying to induce you to open and then just snap 3 bets, like that's usually strength. That's the live pro. Look,
say Sean Deeb says, that's strength to induce someone, goad or dare someone to open and then 3 bet them. I would agree to somewhat with that, but I think the thing to remember is I think it's strong but not very strong. Like I think this is exactly the kind of hand you would see people do this with, like ace king, ace queen, pocket jacks, pocket tens or something. It's going to be strong enough to where they are comfortable doing something like this and okay getting action, but it's also not likely going to be aces or kings, because with aces or kings here, I think you'd see Dentale be much more inconspicuous. Like he wouldn't. The reason he does this is because it's fun for one thing. It also is probably going to get a fold, and he's okay with that. It's not like he would want to scare away, and it's so obviously a kind of like a trap thing. Even if Cate knows it's probably not that strong or might be a little bit strong, it's just such an obvious trap if you're saying don't do it and then you raise. Like I just don't think most players will be doing that with aces or kings because they don't want to scare away action, and most people are going to be folding to that if they're in doubt at all. Because it seems so obviously trappy, and that's why I don't think if you're a somewhat experienced player would be doing that with aces or kings. So, and I've actually used things like this to 4-bet people, because if I feel confident removing aces or kings from their range there, and I think they're capable of folding ace king or other pairs, I'll use that kind of behavior as a to make up my mind to 4-bet light or whatever, because I just don't think they're, that kind of player would do that. That level of player would do that kind of, thing with aces or kings. It kind of fits in with the whole kind of pattern of players early in a hand with strong hands do not like to draw attention to themselves, right? Because players early in a hand with strong hands, whether it's on the pre-flop or on the flop, they generally, don't want to set up an obstacle to losing action. They want to try to they want to maximize their profit, right? And people who want to maximize their profits are usually pretty inconspicuous and not drawing attention to themselves, right? All right, what else we got here? This is the hand right after this, I think. Okay, we're gonna look at a. This is a more of a waiting for action kind of non-aggressor behavior from Mike. We're gonna look at here.
All right, so we got. Oh, there are the muscles. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Although I haven't seen that before. Hey, it's cheap. Cheat in 69, 69, 69. By the way, shout out to my boy Jason Les. Clearly on the rail, as always, as a live
Hey,
pro
Jason
should.
Les was there when I
How
won my
light
first
did you just
bracelet.
pull
He
right
was?
He was, yes.
Nice.
Thank you, Jason, for being.
So what happened was these guys were talking so much over it, it's kind of hard to tell, which is what I hate about most commentary. But Mike bet 300 on the turn, and then Cate called him with bottom pair there, and he said, "How light did you just call me right now?" Now, usually those kinds of like small bet situations, because that was only like a few $100 bet or something, I think. So this is still like a small bet early hand. I think they check the turn. So in these kinds of like small pot situations, any kind of talking, the general theory is any kind of talking from players in these spots will make weak hands more likely. And you see this a lot for players that aren't really that mentally focused or who are kind of defensive. If they want to kind of slow down somebody else, there's a lot of chatter that goes on in these spots. So put another way, if Mike had been betting a straight right here on the turn and Cate called him, I don't think he would have said anything. Like, almost always. He's just saying something there now because it's almost like he's given up, and that's when a lot of these kind of statements from players making small bets pre or on the flop or on the turn, a lot of these little statements come because they'll get called and then they're kind of like not mentally focused and they're like, well, I'm done with this now. I don't plan on finding the river. So it kind of like is a relief of tension kind of thing where they're just speaking off the cuff and joking around. And that kind of thing can make you more confident, on a later street. If you feel like that's a good pattern for somebody, that can definitely encourage you to fire up with more aggression on a later street. Especially because usually that means they're probably going to be checking on the next street, those kinds of things. And this holds up really well for Mike in this match. Like, he has so much, small pot chatter when he has weak hands. He's much more serious, and restrained when he has a big hand and it's early in a hand. And then he gets talkative, sometimes when he is in a big bet situation and is making a big bet, as we saw with the previous hand. So it's just important to understand these different situational categories, like the size of the pot's a factor, the size of, how far along the hand it is a factor, things like that. Changes how people, the general patterns. So I think I'll show some more of that because it's throughout, and don't think that I'm just showing you all the interesting ones because there's other interesting ones too. I'm just trying to pick the ones that give you a sense of what you see in the rest of the event if you wanted to watch the whole thing. Okay, so right after this, he's going to hit his hand. Dentale is going to hit you see it. He hit the straight on the river, so let's watch that.
Being such a weak ass bitch three-handed.
Oh.
I'm just curious how light you call me.
Checking his cards.
I'm gonna make you fold and show you a 5. I'm gonna bet 1,000 and show you a 5.
So Kid just snap folds there because she's got a 7. But it's the same thing we just looked at with his other strong hand a few minutes ago where he had trip 5s. It's almost the exact same pattern, double checking the cards, telling her if she folds, he's going to show her a 5, which he has this time too. Double checking his cards. It's very, very first level stuff. I mean, this is the kind of stuff I read about in Verbal Poker Tells, so it's pretty simple stuff. I don't know. There's not much more to say probably about that. And like I said, I would answer your questions at the end, but if you do have questions, feel free to pop them in because I might get to them. I just can't promise. But if you guys do have questions, feel free to put them in there.
one.
I'm sure. And we also.
This is another example of some defensive or early hand / defensive talking from Dentale when he's weak. Let's see what happens here.
At some point, I have to start drinking. By the way, Sean, we also want to quickly talk about the new Poker Night in America app.
Oh yes, let's.
If you want to quickly just pull that up.
Yeah.
Sure.
Do you want to play poker on TV with our pros? Poker Night in America is about to launch a new social
If you
poker
blow
app
on this pot,
that will
I
let you
fold.
win real world prizes, including a chance to appear
75.
on TV at our table. Very likely with.
So there he checks the flop and says, if you blow on this pot, I fold. And he says 75, And this was a raised pot too. It was $600. It wasn't tiny. And a lot of people get kind of when they hear this kind of stuff, they get kind of psyched out. They're like, oh, is he being serious? Is this person, maybe he's trapping me. He has a strong hand with this kind of verbal stuff. But 90% of the time, this kind of stuff will be what the general pattern says. It'll be somebody who doesn't have a strong hand. They're just talking because they've already given up. They know they're not going to continue unless they hit a good card, for free or something. It'll just be kind of a release of anxiety or a release of tension where they just start having some fun and, getting a little tricky verbally or whatever. And that's exactly what it is here for Mike. He says, blow on this pot, I'll fold. And he's telling the truth. And, I've seen players in games, from somewhat experienced players sometimes get slowed down by this at a, like a 5-10 game I played in. Haven't played in a while, this local game. I've seen good players get slowed down when their opponents will say things like this, like, oh, I don't have anything, bet and I'll fold, and then they check back like a weak hand on the flop that, like bottom pair or something. It's just like, or, even air. Those kinds of things should encourage you to bet, almost always. Sure, every once in a while you'll run into some kind of trap, but most players aren't trying to set some complicated trap early in the hand either. Most of these spots are just going to be people just, getting loose and being weird and not being focused. Let's see, look up the next one. I wanted to include one from Cate. I don't have much to say about it, but just for future comparison, because we want to look at another different one later. So this is Cate's first substantial bluff in the match. Let's look at this. Not a huge pot, 1,200, which, that's like a raise and one bet, I think.
Pretty mandatory stab, and now also again a pretty mandatory stab. Mike having a 4 isn't very good.
But Mike doesn't consider that.
I think the thing to notice about Cate here and her other bluff hands is she has a very stoic manner. Like, she's obviously trying to do the same thing every time. She riffles chips with her right hand and keeps a steady pattern going. She sits quite still and looks in the same place and doesn't give much away. But I'm mainly showing you this to compare, and I might have another bluff hand to compare to, but I mainly want to compare it to a later value bet. We might show a couple of value bets, but at least one.
I'm saying what the actual strategy is. I'm not saying what they're
that's not the
thinking.
actual strategy. That's what the strategy should be. But we're not playing,
That's what it is.
duck poke, lessons here.
I'm talking about actual strategy. You can talk about made up strategy if you want. All right, I'll tell you what. I'll do the actual.
And one thing that I think is true for Cate is the only thing I noticed really, well, besides some very relaxed behavior later on, the one thing I tried to watch for her was her like speed of riffling chips, because I feel like I'm not even sure it's a pattern, but I'll just mention it. I felt like when she is bluffing or weak in general, her riffling is like much more agitated and more quicker and more straightforward. There's not any like real pauses like you see sometimes when she's relaxed, and we'll look at a really relaxed situation later when she makes a big bet and her chip rippling is just really relaxed and slow. So I think keeping an eye on that kind of stuff can be helpful. and that's just something to watch if you do decide to watch the event and see more of that. That's the one. I think that's the one thing to watch for her is that kind of thing.
Actual strategy, and you can say words.
Okay.
All right. You can't be like, oh, you can't talk about actual strategy. It's not what he's thinking. It's still strategy. Oh, God.
I'll just drop some chips.
And Mike is thinking about this. Well, this, by the way, this is one of the reasons I don't like the flop lead. But
His hands are full, but I want to call.
His instincts are spot on again.
however,
Eight. It's a bad one off for me, and it doesn't make sense. So many hands and drawers that beat this small pair I have.
something you never thought you'd hear Mike say.
Open-ended, your flush draw, your overcard. But there's just something about your body language that tells me you're full of shit.
Oh, that's right.
8, right? What do you think?
It's called alternative strategy.
This could be a read gone bad. You know, it happens. Very little pair. Hands are full.
I'll just play this out because it's kind of fun.
But, fuck it.
I gotta.
So, aside from, Cate did have a little bit of facial movement too. It's kind of hard to see because she was turned away from the camera. But the one other interesting thing is that, not that I think it was that meaningful in the match, was she did have some facial movements, when Mike was thinking, she was like, stretching her lips and moving around a little bit. It's good to keep track of that stuff so you know how meaningful stuff might be later. Like if you saw a little bit of that and you knew she was bluffing, that you take that into account for later and just remember it and know what her range is, behaviorally. But we'll look at a hand from the very last hand of the match where she's just super relaxed, and I'd be, it's basically a very clear tell of relaxation from her, in my opinion, and we'll look at that on the last hand. Oh, I think we have a Cate value bet here.
Wins,
She also bets like a man.
I'll always be better than you, though. Just keep that in mind. Remember that. You can play 10 years. You'll never be.
All right.
I think it's a better flop for you. Check it.
Confirmed.
A lot of Broadway cards. Flush draws, straight draws.
Also
It
confirmed.
really has it. They really have it. That's so sick.
Again, as we said, Mike continuing with the pattern of just tugging up a storm when he doesn't have much, early in the hand. Doesn't mean he's going to fold, but this kind of thing would make me feel more confident that he really didn't have much to pay attention to.
It really has it. I check. Unless my card comes out. Yeah, I check.
I check. I guess my cards. Yeah, I check. But his check wasn't binding.
It's a really scary board. Scary card dealer.
Still
Scary
talking.
card. That's a fucking scary card. Check.
Cate's got the straight now, obviously. Let's just watch her chip riffling, see if you see her chip
A
riffling
lot's
be a
hockey
little
in this hand, but
less-
Mike has played it totally standard.
less straightforward and more slow than the last hand we looked at.
I beat absolutely nothing, Caitlin, on pocket threes.
It's generally hard to bluff here in Cate's
What's in the
shoes.
middle?
Yeah.
You can spread it? That's fine.
This one's not actually that slow. I might be thinking of a later one.
Pocket threes,
Uh,
Caitlin. I'm thinking
Dentale
here.
did not angle me yesterday. He owes me 500 and acknowledged it, and we will be square. That's not an angle when we make an agreement. he's not one of the guys I have to worry about collecting money from. I won't be berating him publicly.
I think
I don't think you have it, but this is a tough call for me. It's not worth it. I might have to let this one go.
they're referencing when you went to put your chips over the line, and he called, and then you did, and he tanked.
I think that was fine. I think it's
It was
fine.
close. It looked like
I
you
gotta
were,
let this one go. I can't.
it looked like you were.
Yeah, that one was very interesting. I mainly just think I wanted to show a strong hand from Cate before we move on. So as you can see, they both were quite similar spots, behaviorally from Cate, and I just wanted to show that she was trying to be as stoic as possible. But we'll look at some more interesting hands from her later. All right. Okay, this is one where Mike bets dark with Ace King, I think.
Cate opens Jack 9 suited. Dentale has Ace King, expecting a 3-bet, and Cate definitely called the 3-bet.
I agree. Have a tweet here from Andrew Moreno.
I'm gonna bet blind 1,000.
This is not in the lab.
So, Mike 3-bet with Ace King and then says, I'm going to bet blind 1,000. Sort of fitting with what we were talking about with Mike's early hand behavior and people in general. Like when people bet blind in these kind of spots on the flop, like a pre-flop raiser bets blind, it's hardly ever, in my experience, going to be aces or kings. It's usually going to be a hand like Ace King, maybe queens or something. But in my experience, it's hardly ever been aces or kings, and I just think it's because the same reasons we talked about. Players with aces and kings are more inconspicuous, right? They don't want to draw attention to themselves. They don't want to show such confidence. They don't want to scare people away. They're focused on maximizing their value, and it's kind of related to how Mike did that little trap earlier where he was like, don't do it, I 3-bet. It's like, I don't think he would do that with aces or kings. I don't think he would, dark bet here with aces or kings for those similar reasons. So I think in that sense, it can, that kind of thing can maybe encourage you to play back at somebody if you felt comfortable with the read, depending on the flop, of course. All right, we'll move on. Somebody asked me how I was. I'm good. How are you? If I don't recognize people's names, it's because I'm bad with names, so don't take it personally if I don't recognize you from Twitter or something. Let's see. All right, go to the next one. Okay, we got a strong hand from Mike. Those are always fun.
Oh,
Ooh,
backdoor to flush.
Okay, so Mike backdoor to flush. Let me rewind it a little bit.
So,
Oh, backdoor. He was a lot quieter than when he got back up to
So
11.
Mike bet. She called.
Oh, yeah.
if
She checked.
I actually want to see him move into the lead for a bit, and just like do some gloating. That would be amazing.
And then still lose.
I mean,
Yeah.
whatever.
Backdoor to flush.
So, action here. Mike, bet flop. Interesting turn check when he turns to flush draw. And then rivers the goods.
1,500.
Cate has a pretty clear river bluff. She should be betting here.
This is similar to that very first hand we watched where he overbets the pot, and it's kind of a similar overbet where he just snap reaches for chips and bets. And that's something he does a few times in this match with strong hands, just snap bets, overbets. I think he bets 1,500 here, I think he said. Let's see. Keep playing it.
On the river, can't really have much worse than this.
So I'm surprised that she's,
Notice, speaking of the eye contact, again, yeah, the chat's working. The chat is working. And I'm good. How are you? And, yeah, speaking of eye contact that we were talking about in a previous hand, notice how Mike is again looking towards Cate after betting here and just making more eye contact in general, which is, pretty reliable for a good amount of players and reliable for him in this match. Just much more interaction with strong hands when betting strong hands.
in a lot of spots to not take.
Notice he, I think he double checks his cards here. Let me see again if he does. I also think it was interesting how he kind of like looks at her right before reaching for chips.
That would be amazing.
And then still lose.
I mean,
yeah.
whatever. Ooh,
Backdoor to flush.
So, action here. Mike, bet flop. Interesting turn check when he turns to flush draw. And then rivers the goods. Cate has a pretty clear river bluff. She should be betting here on the river. Can't really have much worse than this.
So I'm surprised that she's, in a loss.
Also notice how Mike puts his hand on his cards before even Cate, starts to fold. Like she basically just starts to make that the folding action, and he's like reaching for his cards. Like he wouldn't. It's kind of like the double checking cards thing. Like messing with cards is such a. It's just not something bluffers usually do. They're going to be more stoic. They're not going to, if somebody's reaching for making a fold, he's not going to like mess with his cards or whatever to try to. He's just going to let her fold, right? Those kind of last second clues can be sometimes helpful if you're just like putting your chips out or acting like you're going to fold. Nothing major there, but I thought it was interesting with the same quick bet he did earlier when he had a strong hand.
Talked about hands yesterday. Whether or not Matt Glance's table talk influenced my play.
This is another strong hand.
Or was out of line. I think normally you guys are right, he's out of line, but me and Matt have a different rapport. He knows the way I am, that he can actually get away with that, and it won't affect my decision making. And like, he's not saying anything I don't know, and I think it makes better TV. I don't mind because that hand's going to be shown, so you're going to have a lot of dead time on TV. It's great that there's table.
Again, this is fitting in with Mike's general pattern and most people's general pattern of talking more early in a hand, when they don't have much, just a sign of not being focused that much,
Table talk instead of just 2 minutes of silence and people staring.
And he's double checking here, and like I said, the double checks really only mean much when somebody's making a decent sized bet, right? Like a bigger bet. Mike double checks in a lot of spots, but it really only means much when he's it indicates relaxation and strength when he's making a big bet, just because he doesn't like, most people don't like to double check cards and look uncertain when they're bluffing, right?
And we have an open and straight draw versus the nut flush draw here. Ooh. I think that the main consideration is for the other person there, not between you and him. Like for the other person.
For Jeremy?
But
Jeremy's conversing back with him. Jeremy doesn't care.
Yeah,
if he's willing to engage and laugh and joke and high
Jeremy
five,
definitely doesn't care.
Yeah.
That's for sure true. So we got a bet and a call. And we have a turn that should end up being good for Mike.
Spade one-time dealer.
Says spade one-time dealer.
Oh, Cate agrees.
You never get the spade dealer.
We made it straight.
I'm gonna bluff at it again. $2,000. Sounds good. 2,000. The bet. Good fold, Cate.
By the way, rooting for a spade while Cate has the brick nut flush draw.
Let me finish Doug's thing.
Makes it way less likely that. It makes it way less likely that he's bluffing, I think.
Yeah. So there's a lot to break down there, but it's what we've seen before when Mike hits a strong hand. He had some. He had the goading. He had the weak hand statement saying he's bluffing. He had the goading, the daring kind of stuff that we've already seen him doing to strong hand bets before. He also had some kind of shrug-like gestures, and let's watch that again, and I'll point them out when he does them. He had some, hand palms up things that I was talking about in the previous hand.
And we have a turn that should end up being good for Mike.
Spade one-time dealer.
Oh, Cate agrees.
So you just did a quick uncertain kind of palms up. Whenever you see palms up kind of gestures from bettors, people either getting ready to bet or already betting, that's probably a bad sign.
You never get the spade dealer. I'm gonna bluff at it again. $2,000.
See more palms up stuff there, just uncertain body language, kind of like.
Sounds good.
Like, it doesn't matter, it doesn't really matter what we do. Yeah, he does make weekend statements. Like, he said, I'm going to bluff at it. And that's one. And as they point out, as Doug points out, on the turn, Mike said, spade one time, dealer, implying, even though it's kind of jokingly, implying that he needs a spade. And then he fires on the river when the spade doesn't come. And as Doug was pointing out, it makes it less likely that Mike is bluffing there too. If he's going to imply he needs a spade and then bet, like it's another form of a we can't statement. Even though we know that it's kind of joking, like it's most bluffers are not going to want to say something that implies they didn't make their hand, even jokingly, and then follow it up with a bet, right? And I've seen this in other games too. I think I have a hand like that in the most recent book of mine, Exploiting Poker Tells, where somebody basically implies that they're drawing on the turn, their draw doesn't get there on the river, and they fire. And that's just like a pattern that, a bluffer's not going. It's basically like a bluffer making it harder. He's having to work uphill. Basically, he's like most bluffers are wanting to put a doubt in your mind, like, oh, was he telling the truth about drawing? Yeah. So that kind of thing. I see my Twitch thing just spinning, so hopefully it's still working. If you guys see any interruptions, let me know, because I'm new to this, so I don't know how this stuff works. Yeah, so he just has the normal, the same amount of massive overlapping general patterns that really that's the thing about Mike's behavior. It's like if it was one thing, just one item, one pattern, it'd be kind of hard to interpret it maybe. But the fact that you've got like many things pointing to the same hand strength, the same general patterns, that's what makes these kinds of things so valuable, is when you can add like several reference points, and not to mention, like we've already seen Mike overbet the pot when he has strong hands, which he never did in this match that I saw with any bluffs. I don't remember, he might have, but it was pretty rare. So I mean, when you get like multiple like strategy level bet sizing things and multiple behavioral things pointing towards one direction, like that can make a lot of decisions super easy. Yeah, I mean, even one of these things Mike's doing, I would feel pretty comfortable basing a decision on. But when you add them all up, it's just a lot of information, and he just doesn't really switch it up like you might think. He's like, capable enough to switch it up, but not from what I saw in this, 4 hours of play. Okay, moving on.
Cate
I try to talk.
I know.
And
that can change me from a 10 out of 100 to a 45 out of 100. That's a big jump for a lot of people. But yes, they're not gonna get much heads up action, but it's gonna improve the ring game play a lot too.
The thing is, I think that the most important thing.
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt. Just so this looks like it's gonna be a big pot going down. Cate.
I try to talk.
I know.
And you overrule what I say, and then you cut me off when I try and get a rebuttal in. I'm mad, Sean.
Control. This is live.
Oh, actually, I thought this was another hand. I took this one off. We'll just skip this one. This one was not interesting. Thought it was a quicker call than that. Yeah, that's not good. All right, moving on.
I would have went.
This is some more defensive verbal behavior from Mike. We'll just watch it for a minute.
Brought to you by. I am really proud though of what I created. Like, I made the whole course. It took me, a couple of months.
But it's just all you see is P-swing Kerr or whatever. She's blocking out, a key part of your patch.
That's all right. We'll take it.
200 I could call.
Yeah, it's a tiny thing, Mike saying 200 I can call and then double checking his cards. I just think these little clues can make you feel better about continuing to bluff or whatever in these kinds of spots. That would definitely encourage me to keep firing if I was on the fence on the turn. Just these little clues. But as soon as the nice things about these kinds of things, as soon as you see an opponent like deviate from the general patterns, you know that to watch out for that. But if a player just keeps adhering to the same usual patterns, then you can feel pretty good about it. It's just you gotta be aware that somebody could switch it up, and when you see them switch it up, then you got to remember that about them. Some players will talk in all sorts of spots, so your confidence level will be based on how long you play with them and how many times you've seen them do the same kind of stuff and how much they deviate from their usual patterns. There's another verbal thing here, I think.
I got a few, so let me just read through some of these.
Check.
Ryan Meese asks, by the way, shout out to my boy Ryan Meese. After seeing the plays so far, what do you think the right line was before we started?
Pocket fives?
It's a really good question.
I feel like the right line is...
Yeah, just another little minor thing, him talking while she bets. There's a lot of those throughout. I probably picked too many of them to show.
It's not the worst option. Ooh, this is a brutal runoff for her.
Mike hit his ace on the river.
Know that she can get away. She's got enough 7s and 9s. She could even have a couple.
But he's not betting anything. He doesn't have a 7 or 9. So the difference, you just say, because calling frequency is so much up.
So a couple of things here already. She checks to him. He knows he's good. This pot hasn't been, isn't that big, and he hits his ace on the river. He double checks his cards, which we've said when it's associated with a decent sized bet, that's going to be strength usually. He also asks to spread the pot, which he only does in this match several times. He only does with strong hands, when betting strong hands. It's it's kind of like this uncertain kind of thing where like, oh, what's in the pot? Oh, maybe I'll be incentivized to bluff at it if the pot looks decent sized or something. Kind of just like implying that the size of the pot is some sort of factor in why he's betting. And I'd usually say that's kind of weak information, but considering in this match, I never saw him do it with when he was betting, making a decent sized bet with a bluff. I think it's pretty meaningful.
Higher.
Yeah.
But in general, uncertain kinds of behaviors from players making decent sized bets will be strength in general. So I think it is a generally useful thing.
Is that the right calling range?
That's another thing. When somebody just grabs chips and puts them in there, it's usually going to be, if they don't count them and just kind of grab them and look like they don't care what the bet is. That can also be tied to relaxation. Usually, a bluffer is going to want the bet to look, more straightforward, more normal, and they're usually going to announce an amount or make it clear what they're betting. And one of the reasons for that is just that, not announcing a bet, your opponent might theoretically think you're betting a different size, especially because you're all the way across the table. It's kind of like bluffers are more aware that they want to get the bet size right because they don't want to be called because their opponent thinks the bet is smaller than it is, So it's kind of related to that. Like, it's just that bluffers want to make their bets usually more well understood in however way. It doesn't have to be verbal, it might just be like making sure that their opponent sees it. So I think these general, like, just grab some chips and put it out there willy-nilly, it's usually tied to bluffs because it's also a little bit of like, oh, I'm trying to look, trying to act like sort of fakely confident or something, like kind of trying to imitate somebody who's bluffing, or something like that. And we'll see Mike do this a few times where he just grabs chips and plops them in without saying anything. I think we see it like 3 times. I'm not sure I show him all. And it's all when he has a strong hand. Okay. Let's see if there's anything else here.
Are the amounts of money being raised for charities being updated? Are they currently updated? The amount of money for charity, has it been updated in a while?
Yeah, it seemed like it's supposed to be updating automatically.
We believe so, but I know
I hope someone's been donating Dentale's side. I never feel bad about any
I think someone was. Cate Hall?
As he double checks his cards again, he likes to do that when he's betting a strong hand.
That was a bad check.
Okay, he folds.
You gotta go over it. It's not bad.
He did seem to be looking towards her a bit more than his usual bluffing MO when he's more restrained. Can't remember now if we looked at one where he was bluffing. Now that I think about it, if I don't show much of his bluffing ones, you could just recommend watching the event because there's a few. There's not that many. He's not really that aggressive. There's only a few where he makes a decent sized bluff.
Six, 7, 6, 8, and a few club combos.
Sorry, keep going. This is an interesting hand just for watching Cate with, after a big, she thinks it's a bluff anyway. She shoves with a nut flush blocker.
Player at his age, I'm sure he's tuning in. Doyle loves this match. He's actually rooting for Dentale, which is, not surprising based on their political belief. But Doyle's a great guy. Unfortunately, his son's an asshole.
Mike bet really small here too.
Mike.
600.
All in?
Oh!
This is mainly something I wanted to compare to Cate's later hand when she is strong on the last hand we'll look at.
It's just not poker at this point.
So what Cate's trying to do here is balance out this range by having pair plus the nut flush blocker, which is the correct hand to use, with flushes. The problem is that it's a really small bet. So that might make ace-7.
Notice she's very still.
Yeah.
She's not riffling chips, which is her usual
and
MO.
if he had like Jack 10 or
still.
something, he might level something calling, thinking you're turning an 8 or King 10 with a heart or Ace 10 with a heart into a bluff.
Her jam is actually both good and in the course. This is actually just correct.
Because his range is just so capped?
Well, the question is, do you want to use ace-7 or ace-deuce? Or maybe ace-10?
Mainly, I just wanted to show how stoic and still Cate was there for a later reference, for later comparison. One second. Switch to the other video. Sorry for the ads.
One of the best turn cards for her, and that she just has the perfect read on his bet sizing, and that Mike is.
Oh, somebody was asking. The hyper stillness isn't associated with anything there. I mainly just wanted to show that Kate's MO usually is to stay stoic, whether she's riffling chips or not. I just wanted to show you some of that very, very still behavior from Cate, because I wanted to compare it to a later hand when she's very relaxed and doing more movements. So stillness in itself is not a sign of anything, unless you have some player-specific information that, a player's always has more little movements or something when they're relaxed. But in itself, I mean, most players in most spots when they make decent-sized bets are still, and that's hard to get a read from if that behavior is consistent. And I saw, Cate is also, she was either capable of just sitting really still and riffling chips, or just sitting really still and not riffling chips. Those were her two main things she did. And there's not much to get there if somebody's pretty balanced. There's probably other super subtle things, but nothing I picked up on in watching it once. Let's see. All right. Let's look at a Mike bluff.
Let's talk about this for a second.
Classic
Dentale
Sean.
opened a 3. Well, when there's a big pot going down,
Hold
with
on,
no equity,
Sean. Hold on. We gotta talk.
do I really always interrupt you about?
Ace Jack,
You're just always talking.
4 deuce. You know how to pair that hand.
So anyway, Dentale opened a 300.
Should have
Cate
checked the
called.
flop and blasted the turn.
Dentale bet 500. She called.
The hand's so polarized on the
You ever
flop.
think about
It's flush
folding the
draw or
flop
deuce,
with her
which
hand?
is so bad.
I just think so many hands have so much equity, and you're just getting barreled off.
No,
You're never bluffing
Okay.
because you're not capable of
'Cause he's gonna
bluffing. You're
bluff
not
the ace
good
so
enough
often.
to bluff.
You just call fold. It's okay to call fold. You know that, right?
It's on you.
Every time your logic comes up,
Seven.
you're like,
I hate call folding. I
you
hate.
have to do that.
I just think I'm getting.
I just wanted to show this one because it's the verbal stuff. When in small bet situations like this, like Mike only bet 700, pretty small bet from what we're looking at. So when we're talking about verbal stuff, there's a big difference between small bet verbal stuff and big bet verbal stuff, which I was saying earlier. And I just wanted to emphasize, I wouldn't compare this to Mike's goading and insults that he's had on the river when he's making a bigger bet. This is a much different spot. This is the kind of thing that would make me think like he's probably not focused here. I wouldn't have strong feelings about it just because I could imagine him also doing this with a strong hand, because it's kind of like this borderline, like it's the turn and the bet's a decent size, and I wouldn't necessarily think it meant he was very weak, but I just wanted to say that this is a much different kind of verbal situation than what we looked at the few times when Mike was, betting a big hand on the river and kind of goading Cate and insulting her a little bit, daring her to call or fold or whatever. I just think it's important to recognize how bet sizing affects situations, and how, the river, when everything's done, can affect situations because it's a different spot, less to think about. People get more relaxed on the river when they have strong hands, things like that.
What do I think about the people who bet on Dentale? I just think, it's a very big.
I'm going to skip this one. I feel like we're just covering the same stuff now, so. Don't want this to go on forever. There's just a lot of stuff to look at. It's kind of fun. If you guys enjoy that, you might like watching the whole thing to see how these things show up in a few different other spots. All right, this is one where Dentale's got trips.
Streets, now probably all 3. Hopefully Dentale does one of his small bets here, or he goes big. He's just literally giving up his hand strength. Every big bet has been a lot better. Every small bet's been weak, and Kate's going to get that info and totally abuse him like she's been doing. You can't be this face up. The action doesn't even matter, just bet size that matters.
I'll say there, I hear you can hear Dentale like double checking his cards too when Cate double checks her cards, which is kind of funny to me because when I watched her double check, I was like, Mike likes to double check when other people double check their cards, and I listened for it and you could hear him doing it. So I'll just roll that back because I think that's kind of funny. The predicted behavior was there.
I mean, if Cate
I don't
makes
know
a
if you
fold
could hear
to
it. It was pretty subtle,
this hand
but I'm
right
pretty sure
here,
that's what it was.
one of the best turn cards for her, and that she just has the perfect read on his bet sizing, and that Mike is just drawing stone dead, unless he just gets bailed out by the deck every single hand. All right, she calls, which is totally fine.
Notice also, this is kind of fitting in with what I was saying with verbal stuff too. Mike has a strong hand here, makes a significant bet, and he's quiet, right? He's not doing his insulting like he did on the turn in the previous hand we looked at. And this is how people with strong hands usually act. They're just laying low, not wanting to scare away action.
I actually didn't bet on either person.
But now things might change on the river, right? Because when the river comes and you make a bet and you get a little bit more relaxed, you know, the hard work is done. You already got a decent sized pot. You might want to have some fun, goading people or whatever.
Bet on the length of the match. So I got very lucky that apparently they were going to go up in a few minutes.
This is kind of a funny one.
First match. See, Mike's giving away so many things like, I don't know if I like that river. What do I do? To a good live player that's going to say, he's never going to make that face and he's bluffing. He's too good at live poker. He's always strong when he does that. And I think Cate's, picking up on that.
You missed your flush.
The palms up, shrug.
Is he going to check back because he thinks she's not calling worse?
You missed your open-ended.
Mikey, if you check this hand,
You would have bet a queen.
you just have nothing. You don't talk about, oh, you would have bet a queen. Oh,
Eights, pocket eights.
Another double check. It's like 4 times now. Okay, maybe that was the 4th one. And again, notice he just puts the chips in like we were talking about without even counting them. Just kind of shoves a stack in there like, oh, I don't know what it is. It doesn't really matter what it is. And obviously you have all the, like Sean Deeb was pointing out, how ridiculous all the questions about her hands, almost like those are basically weak hand statements. They're indirect weak hand statements. It's basically saying, oh, I don't think you have strong hands. I think you were drawing, you missed, or you have a low pair. And by saying stuff like that, you're basically weakening your own hand strength too, because when you bet, you're basically implying, well, if I'm betting because I don't think you have those strong hands that I removed from your range, it's just if your hand's weak, my hand might be weak too to bet. So it's just all these weak hand statements in different forms, which I talk about in Verbal Poker Tales if you haven't read it. That's one of the most, there's so many patterns that fall under the weak hand statement. They're just different kinds of weak hand statements. This is clearly another very clear example of that kind of stuff. And notice he's looking at her again too, right? Which we talked about him doing a lot more when he had a strong hand. Let's roll it back because I think he did some interesting stuff right when it was his turn. Yeah, like Deeb was talking about how uncertain he looked. Like notice he looks at her, he looks back at his chips. He, plays with his chips a little bit. He looks back at his cards. It's like all this uncertain behavior, which, again, it's all these things that line up pointing to one thing. If it was just one thing, if it was just one item out of all these, it'd be a little bit harder to feel confident, making a read maybe. But the fact that they're pointing in the same direction is pretty meaningful. So I'll play this just a few more seconds of this
Live players
start.
can say, he's never going to make that face and he's bluffing. He's too good at live poker.
Oh, I think I
he's
skipped
always
it.
strong when he does that. And I think Cate, in a few minutes...
Yeah, looking at her, bouncing his chips,
so
checking his cards again.
Like that river.
Just all this
what do I do? to a good live player that's going to say he's never going to make that face and he's bluffing. He's too good at live poker. He's always strong when he does that. And I think Cate's, picking up on that.
They missed your flush.
That's one thing I talk about one little part of this in the newest book too, where, when somebody, say you check to somebody on the river and they look at you, they glance at you a couple times and then bet. Almost always that's going to be, when somebody glances at you a few times in like an obvious way, like Mike did here to Cate a couple times, it's just usually going to be them trying to look like they were indecisive and they're actually strong. It's kind of like this incentive to be like, oh, I'm going to act like I'm checking you out because maybe you'll think I was trying to get a read on you and thought you were weak and that's why I'm bluffing. It's kind of like implying that there's some thought process related to the other person's demeanor, as opposed to just betting because your hand is strong. So I get worried when I check to somebody on the river and they glance at me a couple times, as if unsure what to do, and then they end up betting. Somebody asked, weak hand statements can indicate strength. If you haven't read my Verbal Poker Tales book, that's one of the main themes in that book. It basically means when a bettor specifically, we're talking about bettors here, players making significant bets. When a player making a significant bet weakens his hand range in some way, and that's what I call a weak hand statement, it usually will indicate strength and relaxation, because a bluffer does not usually want to weaken his hand range. He doesn't want to weaken, the hands he has. And a real good example of this, like a simple example, would be like, you check on the river and a bettor bets, and you ask the bettor, do you have trips? And the bettor says no. That's a weak hand statement because he's removed trips from his hand range, right? That's something that a bluffer just hardly ever wants to do, And there's different kinds of hand range or weak hand statements, and like I showed you here, this was kind of an indirect ones, But they all have the same kind of interpretation, basically, that bluffers don't want to typically remove strong hands from their range because they don't want to have an opponent believe them or get suspicious, They just don't want to take that chance usually. Okay. Let's look at one other interesting spot here where Deeb says some more stuff.
That's horrible.
Those asking who won the match, you see in the top left corner, Cate won the first match. She got off like a similar start to this time, got him down to 5K. Mike battled back to even, and then he, got bluffed out of a big pot and, made a couple bad call downs, then it was game over. Another, live pro thing. Who sees a flop and just sighs like they totally missed? You always hit them. You don't say that if you had, ace 5 suited. You say that if you connected with the flop. You sigh to try to get your opponents to put some money in.
Yeah, see, Deeb, I slightly agree with Deeb here. It was kind of like what he said earlier. I disagree with it in the same way because I think it does indicate some level of relaxation, but at the same time, I do not think that Dentale would be doing something ostentatious like this here early in the hand if he had a queen, if he had trips. I think it's something he might do if he's somewhat relaxed like he is here with the flush draw. But at the same time, it's something that I think would make me more confident that he doesn't have the queen, because he wouldn't, this early in the hand, he wouldn't want to draw attention to himself, doing a sigh, which is such a superficially obvious, kind of first level tell of weak means strong kind of thing, So, it might actually, depending on the situation, would make me theoretically continue in some spots where I wouldn't or raise him. Though I think that, board texture plays a lot of role in what we decide to do with tells too, because, for example, on this board, even if you thought Mike was weak, if he has a strong flush draw or even a flush and straight draw, combo draw, there's a chance that even if you raise him, he's going to be willing to get a lot of money in. So that the board texture can play a big role in what you decide to do with tells, because you could be, like in a spot like this, you could be like 90% certain or something that Mike wouldn't do that with a queen, like make that weird sigh and then bet with a queen, and then you raise him. But even if you're certain, there's a good amount of times where he's just gonna have a really strong draw and be willing to get it in with you or whatever. So that's why you got to factor those kinds of things in there too. Sometimes it's better to just wait for another spot, or else call if you're confident, then just call and wait to take it away later in the hand or something. Assuming you're confident with the read, which I'm only this confident about Mike's tells because I've watched him for 4 hours in this match and thought about it. And for strangers, you might not be so confident to have that kind of confidence in a read. But yeah, in general, the ostentatious early hand stuff will make me more likely to keep playing or play back at somebody. Yeah, it's kind of like when I see this kind of flop, and you have similar ostentatious behaviors. Like somebody sees this kind of flop and they just immediately fire out a bet. Like a quick bet in that spot is hardly ever going to be a queen for the same reasons. It's like usually players with trips or a strong hand are going to want to think about it a little bit more and not draw attention to themselves. They don't want to scare away action. It would kind of suck if you had trip queens here. Then again, there's also the board texture can be a factor too, because maybe somebody with trip queens on this board, if they're afraid of diamonds or just want to win it outright, could bet that way. But in general, those kinds of ostentatious behaviors will make the really strong hand unlikely. So just something to think about and we're talking about early hand here. If Mike was making a big bet and sighing on the river, then that would be a much different situation, and I would say, yeah, he's probably strong in that other situation.
Poker in America, and
okay, this is another Cate Hall one to watch, because this was the one I was thinking of earlier. I think where she was. I was going to play this one because she's relaxed. She has a strong hand, and she just has much more relaxed chip handling when she's riffling her chips compared to her usual. I think we saw earlier when she was doing her more normal stoic, just very standard regular chip riffling. So in this one, we'll watch as she knows that, and by the way the hand went down, she knows the king is good because it was on the flop, and then the ace comes on the river, and I think Dentale checks. So the way the hand went down, and it's a pretty small pot, she's quite sure she's good here. So let's just watch for a little bit.
Mike had like ace king on a king high board, and like a bunch of draws got there, and she turned whatever hand she had into a bluff.
I saw that hand too. That's been on Poker Hands.
We'll watch her after she's
back. You guys, the Poker Hands fans, no, we were familiar
just
with
watch her chip riff.
No, we've done that. I was
didn't do the Cate Hall one.
I was debating the Cate Hall one, but it just didn't make it to the front of the pack yet. But at some point, I might do that one.
It's a good hand, yeah.
Really?
Yeah, it's a good hand.
I don't think it was as bad.
Smash with the deck again, like
say.
every hand. You really?
I thought it was
Easy
very
game,
unlikely
huh?
Abernathy would be bluffing there, frequency-wise. But I know you're going to say...
Life's a balance. I guess you deserve to have something in life.
This board coming in backwards every time I look at it always messes me on the main screen.
I know.
I keep like saying, how did she get there? Why is she valuing king? But it was king high, and then,
She knows she's good here.
Oh, of course.
Mike might even bet his ace-x in the turn sometimes, I think.
She's just moving around a lot more here, too, than usual.
She checked back to top pair, we kick her 100%.
Making some yawning movements, moving her arms around.
Is that the frequency you train, or you think it should be
puts her hand
a
under her
little bit more
chin.
balanced?
Just a little bit more physically
your top
relaxed
pair
than we've seen her,
I would generally advocate checking the weaker ones.
It's for the fun. Nice.
And I think this spot for Mike is a pretty easy fold.
Yeah.
He has some aces. He should have some aces. He should have some queens. All of his queens. Most of his queens. And then maybe even a couple kings. And still doesn't have to call a 9. Also not a good candidate for bluff raise, because you want to have a jack or a 10 in it. So,
How bad
10
do you want
9,
to show me a
Jack
bluff?
9, no
Pretty
club
bad.
would be it.
I know.
He asks, how bad do you want to show me a bluff? And Kate says, pretty bad.
Nice bluff, yeah. In
This the
conjunction with Jack 10. Maybe a couple two pairs.
Might be.
This is the first time Kate's
He says, is this the one? And she says, might be.
actually responded to Banter on the River. I would think she's
I have
a little
another
strong
mediocre
now.
hand, just a 9. Another unfortunate run out. I'm playing
What's
too
the other
passive.
card?
I'm sorry?
What's the other card?
6.
Stupid comment by her. Clearly the
I don't
kicker
mind.
doesn't matter on Ace King Queen.
Now she's playing with her chips, in a very relaxed manner.
Yeah, you see, you live pros. I just going at it.
Flipping
I'm
the
just
chips
here
over
trying to
and
play
over.
poker.
There's so much free information. It's like when someone bets or checks and wants.
This is kind of, as Deep said, I don't know if you heard him, that this is the most interaction that Kate had the whole match. Also interesting that she makes her own weak hand statements basically when Mike asked, how bad do you want to bluff me? And she said, pretty bad. He said, is this the one? She said, might be. I mean, she's not saying she's bluffing, but the fact that she's willing to say that, yeah, this could be the one I'm bluffing at. I don't think she would be doing that if she were bluffing. I don't think she would answer either of those questions if she were bluffing. From what I've seen of this match, I just don't think, she would take the risk of making those weak hand statements, And a lot of people think like, oh, wouldn't better players be balanced? But even for good players, like good players avoid kind of weird spots like that unless they're relaxed. And too, it applies to them too. Most players aren't trying to like create some crazy leveling situation where they are creating some complex, mental deception. It just doesn't happen that way because it's really hard to guess, how your opponent's going to respond to your behavior to begin with. And so that's why, most of these kind of weird interactions and weak hand statements happen when players are more relaxed. It's just a natural thing.
They say is the same information.
Well,
And I think the other interesting thing in here, and something that'll come up again in the last hand we look at, is Kate's, very loose playing with her chips. Like I didn't see her do that in any other spot. Like she was either sitting stoically or she was just riffling them normally. But this whole like playing with the chips and flipping them end over end, we'll see that again in the last hand we look at when she wins the match.
Bet size.
I agree, but you have to interpret the information correctly.
Yes. But you're a smart guy. You can
Well, thank
figure
you, Sean. You are also a smart guy. Yeah,
I'm very good at bluffing how smart I am.
I said it.
You
Two
didn't mean
pair
it.
hand goes 0.
That was the live reads
Wait.
just right through it.
Dentale, you are wrong. It is second pair hand, not a two pair hand or zero.
Yeah, this is kind of the opposite of that.
10 seconds.
The slower
wanna
he goes, the
keep
less likely I am win my prop bets.
Okay?
6 also not a great card to have. I mean, whatevs.
Yeah, I mean, he's called so many times the ace high, king high, whatever other random shit.
You get even nervous when you have it. When you have it, you're not supposed to get nervous.
I'm not nervous.
She's talking for the first time, Mikey. She's bluffed like 7 times and didn't talk. But you're not getting the hands because you're...
Notice Kate double checking her cards here too. Little bit of that. I don't think she'd be doing that if she were bluffing.
an idiot. So that's how you don't know this.
Steve, you're firing the shots.
I mean, it's, I like Mikey personally. It's just he let his ego get in the way, and he's costing his beautiful daughters money by just wasting their money by doing this heads-up match and playing so poorly, not studying, not doing anything. He just trusts his own intuition, and his intuition has just been subpar at best.
I agree across the board.
And burning more money.
Dave's cracking me up in this commentary. He's pretty funny. No holds barred with the commentary. All right, moving on. Won't be too much longer. Jeez, I still have 3 pages of this stuff. I'll try to move this along a little bit. Okay, I had one where Dentale was bluffing the Turner River, very restrained, No verbal. Yeah. We can skip that one. Okay, this one's kind of interesting. 48:30. If anybody wants to watch these, if anybody wants to watch the event with my notes, like the times of my notes, feel free to ask me. I can send you that later. I think the timer is not visible in the way that it cropped the screen.
I mean, look, I don't.
This is a hand where I think Dentale hits the ace on the
I like
river.
this. So
I know.
whatever.
Did you ever get to play?
I
When was the
only
last time you
bluff
played
the
someone
turn,
Sean
and
that
then
Sean,
hit the
I
ace.
guess to be fair, I only became the best heads-up player in the world. So who am I to say what they should be doing in this spot?
I understand, but I think you.
Who am I to say what they should do
So
in
why,
a heads-up
why
hand?
would you check that versus Dentale? Who's
Because if you don't ever check a queen, then first off, they can value bet.
It's very subtle, but I like to look for these like little tiny signs of waiting to put the chips into the pot, right? Because it's just something that bluffers generally don't like to do. Bluffers like to just put the pots in the put the chips in the pot and just drop them, and that's it, straightforwardly. But every once in a while, with players making value bets, you can spot them like doing these little hesitating gestures, like they'll wait, after they pick up the chips, or they'll wait when their hand's in the pot before they drop it. So let's watch Mike again when he does this.
Why would you check that versus Dentale? Who's
Because if you don't ever check a queen, then first off, they can value bet more safely with 8x because they never get.
So he like grabs them, puts them down for a second, grabs them again, holds them out, pauses, and drops them. Those are just interesting. I like to try to correlate that for people. Try to watch if people do those little subtle things. Someone said, "No rush. We got all night." Yeah, I don't want to. I think some of this stuff is just redundant, so I don't want to spend too long on it because I think you guys kind of get the point. I mainly just logged all the things that were more obvious. And oh yeah, this is an interesting one. We should look at this one. One from Cate here with a value bet.
well,
Cate's got the straight on the river. Remember, these cards in the middle are reversed. It's kind of bad camera for that, but it's the ones on the right are the way the cards came.
shame for Cate that he doesn't have a slightly better hand.
Now, Cate has to decide if she thinks that there's more value here in.
So she just shoves very quickly. It's only a few seconds into a pretty big pot, and this is one of the bigger ones we looked at. Only waits like, I don't know, what is it, like 5 seconds or something. So that's a pretty, for that spot, that's a pretty quick bet. It's pretty polarizing, as we say. Quick bets are usually polarizing, right? They're usually pretty strong or pretty weak. Players with medium strength hands have to think more, players who want to make thin value bets or whatever want to think more. Players with, weaker one pair type hands might want to think about turning their hand into a bluff or whatever. So the quick bets are quite polarizing. And so let's hear the commentators. They talk about this a little bit and kind of talking about the same thing.
Checking or betting.
He's gonna be like, finally got dealt a pair. I think I would like considering a little bit longer on the river than snap piling. It's too scary of a board to not take a little bit longer.
Yeah, I like in big spots taking my time. I think
Yeah.
we both know that. And I agree with you.
Because, there's so few hands you can snap jam that river with, and I can't imagine she's going to be like, ace queen, okay. I don't think he has a jack or six. I'm going all in.
Well, actually, he doesn't really have many.
All right, they get kind of technical after that, but yeah, the main point is if a player who's been playing pretty solid and cautiously, the whole match and then snap bets on the river, pretty likely they're strong. It's pretty unlikely they just all of a sudden decided to, run a huge bluff all of a sudden when they've been cautious throughout the whole match. 1 second. Okay, this was a fun one too. It was kind of fitting in with the whole being, hesitating a bit before betting. You see this a good amount.
But like he doesn't have too many flush draws, like because it's a limp pot,
Well,
And
no.
you bet full pot.
He mainly just has random pairs, though. Like
But is he calling without a 6 kicker on those pairs?
Well, for starters, he has to call some of them, and
She bet 900. That's just too much.
And then also,
Lost my resolution.
Mike has not been a staple of discipline laydowns. So I kind of like the idea of betting this. The size is too big. It needs to be like 4 or 500.
I think she's just setting up river pot size bet as her goal.
Also, because this is a limp check pre, it decreases the total frequency that.
I was hoping the resolution would improve a little bit. This was, this is an all-in from Mike. Try to play it again.
She bet 900. That's just too much.
And then also, Mike has not been a staple of discipline laydowns. So I kind of like the idea of betting this. The size is too.
So I think what the interesting thing here is Cate bets her 2 pair, and Mike assembles the. Thanks. See you later. Mike assembles the amount of chips for a call, like he's thinking about calling, and then decides to go all in, shoves with this straight. These kinds of hesitating, pausing kind of things are big giveaways, can be big giveaways. Like if Mike was thinking about shoving with a, like flush draw or something, it's pretty unlikely he would want to look like he wasn't sure about what to do and make it look like he was thinking about a call first and then shoving, right? If he had a flush draw, he would just push it in, and try to look confident about it. He wouldn't want to gather the chips for the call and then be like, oh, okay, I guess I'll shove, change my mind. So that's kind of those kinds of, it fits in with the hesitation kind of stuff we were looking at earlier. Let's just watch it again.
She bet 900. That's just too much.
And then also, Mike has not been a staple of discipline laydowns. So I kind of like the idea of betting this. The size is too big. It needs to be like 4 or 500.
I think she's just setting up river pot size bet as her goal.
Also, because this is a limp check pre, it decreases the total frequency that Mike has an ace.
So he shoves there.
So because of that, and she's really put herself into a spot here.
Yeah.
So because of that, it increases the polarization, and in spots where people where the polarization increases for your opponent, generally speaking, smaller bet sizes do better because they're more likely to have a hand that has to call or has to fold or whatever. So yeah, I would like to see. Yeah, I don't mind check or bet in the turn. If you do bet, I think you
Just like
need
such a call, but you don't.
to bet like
Bluff.
500.
She almost didn't want to say it. She's like, you're still so dumb and such a meathead that I can say it, and you're still not going to bluff.
He's double checking his cards again, like he likes to do.
All right, fine.
That's just bad, Cate.
See, that's one. That's one she shouldn't have bet. They all agreed. I think we all agree. Most people would agree she shouldn't have bet the turn. And then I think she, if she had the same reads on Mike that I do, she could have got away from that turn bet with all the hesitating behaviors and then his double checking the cards. Those were all pointing the same direction. And again, it's worth pointing out here. Mike didn't have any verbal here. He didn't goad her or anything like that. But we have to remember, it's not the silence that's meaningful. Usually, it's when they do the weird stuff that's meaningful, right? Like the absence of a tell is not necessarily a tell, right? A lot of people get that kind of twisted where they're like, oh, you said when he's strong, he talks a lot and goads and makes verbal statements and stuff. But he doesn't always do that with a strong hand. The point is, when he does do that stuff, you can be quite confident sometimes that he has a strong hand. It doesn't mean that just because he's not doing that stuff, he's going to have a weak hand, right? There's going to be more variety, because most people are silent and normal in most spots, whether they're bluffing or value betting. It just happens that for big bets, sometimes people get relaxed and let some signs of relaxation through, and that's what you're looking for. Usually the tells you get off big bets are going to be, reading when someone's relaxed and has a strong hand. That's just how it works. It's a lot harder to make a weak hand read, just because the way people act when they have weak hands kind of corresponds to how people act in general normally. They try to be stoic and quiet and normal. So, all right, let's move on. One second. Okay, another Mikey Strong one. Mike gets bailed out on the river here when he hits.
You keep saying he's polar, but he keeps betting like second and third pair in a lot of spots.
How long have I had that on small screen? That was stupid of me. Sorry about that. Thought I had it full
He
screen.
gets bailed out, though. And Cate has a easy call, even though she
He bet like full pot, though. I think he bet 2,000. 1,600.
Do you notice how he put in the chips again without saying anything and just did it all in one movement? Let's look at that again. He's done this like 3 times, I think, in spots we looked at.
He gets bailed out, though.
He just puts it in there. Stack of chips. Doesn't matter what it is. Just grab them and put it in. Yeah.
And Cate has a easy call, even though she.
He bet like full pot, though. I think he bet 2,000. 1,600.
Yeah, I mean, she's gonna have to call.
What is he bluffing with, though?
Double checking again.
He's bluffing with stuff.
We just talked he doesn't barrel draws in equity.
Too high up in your range.
I do think when people rub their face too, like when they make rubbing gestures on their face or their head or whatever, that's usually going to be a sign of relaxation too. It's just bluffers avoid these kinds of soothing behaviors because people understand, like, here's a more extreme example, like rubbing your neck is a self-soothing behavior, and most people understand that, so you won't find bluffers often doing that when bluffing. Same with rubbing the face in general. It's a self-soothing behavior. So a bluffer kind of instinctually doesn't want to do those behaviors because they might have an opponent who thinks, oh, they're trying to look relaxed by covering their mouth or rubbing their chin or something, and they might get called. So that means most of these behaviors take place from people with strong hands, just being relaxed and maybe trying to look a little bit thoughtful or worried or whatever. That was actually, if you ever read Joe Navarro's book, which he collaborated on with Phil Hellmuth. It was basically like Phil Hellmuth presents Joe Navarro's Read 'em and Reap book. That was one of the big problems I had with that book, was they talked about soothing behaviors being actual signs of concern and anxiety, but you just never see. You don't really see that at a poker table. When people self-soothe, it's usually because they're relaxed. It's the opposite. And I think that was like one of the big mistakes in Joe Navarro's books, was because he brought over these kind of general tells from like the interrogation and police world that were just general human behavior tells, like somebody getting nervous and when being interrogated because they're nervous. But those kinds of things don't map over well to poker, because in poker you have there's a instinctual incentive to act the opposite of what you really feel, and it's very instinctual. So I think that was where that book failed a lot in my eyes. Like some of that book's okay, but there's a large section where he talks about soothing tells and similar kind of worried tells, but that I think is just completely wrong for poker applications. So just a little aside there. Let's just keep watching a little bit. So I think something else might happen.
She's gonna have some like pair plus straight draws and pair plus flush draws. Of her sevens, I think 7-5 is one of the best ones to call with.
You always say that's one of the worst.
Like I told you, he likes to do when she double checks his cards. He double checks his cards too. It's kind of a funny little thing he does that other people do this too. It's like, oh, well, what did I have? I don't think I never saw him do that when he was bluffing.
Worst ones because it blocks the straight. Like
no, you don't want to. No, because 5 here blocks 5-4.
I got it.
You don't want to have an 8, 9, or 10.
What's
Those
it?
The winning hand.
like 9-5, 8-5.
Yeah, because you don't want to block any of the cards that can only be used as a bluff.
Good fold.
Like 8, 9, and 10 are cards that can only be used as bluffs, whereas a 5 can be value or a bluff.
Another little goading thing that Mike says there is she's like, I have a hand I'm supposed to fold. And he says, good fold. That's kind of a goading thing. Like, yeah, I know you're folding. I don't think he would be saying that. You don't hear that kind of stuff from bluffers too often. Just, goading stuff in general.
The funny thing is, Cate says she has a hand she should fold.
Oh, well, I mean, I'm not Cate.
No, I know. It's just funny, like, from your,
No,
discussion,
you'll lose
from
if
your
you call.
videos, that it seems that
I'm not
either she
desperate.
didn't take away the stuff you put
called a
out
value
there,
bet.
or she just is
I'm not desperate. This is called a value bet as he rearranges his cards.
using her own intuition and instincts.
Well, the thing is,
And looking at her a lot too, as we've discussed with the eye contact. You'll notice if you watch the event, he's got a good amount of bluffs where he just, remains looking down and doesn't look at her much at all. Okay. Let's look at I think Doug says something interesting here. Do you have a plan?
poker is so
Good
complicated.
fold, Cate.
Yeah, it worked out better than if I was there. Poker is so complicated. Like,
Well, you just said
it's
you'd
hard
show,
to really take
and then
everything
you
in.
folded.
Like,
Didn't I say I'd show if you called?
No, you said I'll show if you fold.
I apologize.
Doug was saying poker is tough because it's hard to take everything in, and I think that's it is a good point. I think he talks more about it later, but basically the point that they were talking about trying to fit in live tell kind of stuff into a fundamental strategy, which Doug admits isn't his, it's not a strong point, but he's open to the idea. But there's just so much information to take in sometimes. It's kind of hard to notice all of it. Like sometimes you'll realize, I haven't been paying attention to this little bit of behavior that, I think probably was meaningful if I'd gone back and looked at it. And just because it's so hard, there's so many points of reference for behavior and strategy. There's so many points of things to remember and try to apply. And that's kind of the strength of having a game theory optimal solution. Like Doug does, a very strong strategy where when you're in doubt about it, you always have a good strategy. Obviously, like that stuff's just so much more important than poker tells. And I always like to emphasize that, that's the most important thing is understanding the basic strategy. And that way, you're making a good decision, even when you're discarding, all the extra information, you're still making fundamentally great decisions. And that's a hard point to get to, obviously, if you don't know Doug, he's a very good player, like one of the best heads-up players in the world. All right, let's watch the last hand where this is the winning hand where Cate wins. We'll watch a little earlier.
a $42,000 each flip.
I was the poor video man, so apparently it came out good on phone.
Deep just straight up ruined the video with his camera work.
I'm very drunk and I'm not used to doing these things, so I was just trying to show everything, so I was kind of all over the
Yeah,
place.
it's all right.
Like I am in play, like I am in life.
You did your best.
So that's
But,
kind of insulting that I did my best and it was awful.
It happens. But anyway, That's
Yeah.
over on my YouTube channel, Doug Pug Poker, if you want to sweat that flip. I also had a cool conversation.
Oh, I just realized I'm I'm one hand off. Yeah, this is the one. Yeah, let's watch this from pre-flop just because it's a fun one. It's the last hand, and maybe we'll see something interesting.
Cranburglar, 25K. Great screen in, by the way. But Jesus, can I play this guy? But also,
it's just min-raise. Ooh, this might be the end of the match.
This is it.
This has got to be
does he
the
get
end.
away?
How did?
To be fair, Mike has had so few hands even this good.
Yeah. He's gonna be like, oh, she didn't flop top pair. I did, and I'm drawing dead.
This is one of Mike's best hands.
0%. There is a check mark in Cate Hall.
How is he going to get away from this?
Just bet 1,000 and go all in on the river, Cate. Do it.
Look at the chat. They're all it's like, oh, GG, guys, GG. It was a good run. Good run. Rip, wrecked. Rip, dead.
Don't bet no, not 13. Just bet 1,000. You get stacks in with 1,000.
Yeah, I'd like to see a little smaller here.
Yeah. He looks like he wants to get away.
I'm going to say, though, that even though
Matt Glantz here.
Dentale
finally flopped top pair.
Even though Mike has not played well today, he has run exceptionally card dead.
Yeah. I really think he's going to get away from this. Looks like he really wants to.
How?
He shouldn't. Game theory says no. But luckily for him, he's not a game theory player. Yeah, the question is if he...
I do think Mike's behavior is a little, I do think he's he's genuinely a bit worried, but also he does have a hand. So and I think because it's obviously such an important near end of the game match, it's kind of hard to. I would have a hard time reaching one way decision or another about what Mike has here because he's given all these weak means strong behaviors here, but in this case because he knows that either Cate's got him crushed or he's winning. I think he's genuinely in a tough spot, and I think his behavior is going to be a bit, hard to read, middle of the road, because it's not like the typical spots where, he's got a good amount of chips behind or whatever. So yeah, if I was in this spot, I would be thinking well, Mike could have a really strong hand from the way he's acting because he's doing that double checking, acting on certain thing, but at the same time, it's he could be acting that way with a decent but still, vulnerable hand like the one he has, where it's he knows he's probably going to have to put some money in the pot, but he's not that happy about it. Yeah.
He calls, does she slow or not? Say, I just have a king, your ace is good.
That would be funny.
Basically thinking about calling and shoving.
That would actually
here,
be hilarious.
That's what I mean. If I'm in Cate's spot here, I'm like, how am I going to slow roll this hand? I can show a king and actually I'm trying... Bet too much, Cate.
So let's watch. Be watching Cate's behavior in this because that's why I queued this up. Was Cate's behavior? Just how much movement. We've seen her in a few hands when she was, betting with weak hands with bluffs, and she was very reserved and still. So let's watch her here as Mike thinks.
Matt Glantz here.
Even though
Dentale finally flopped top pair.
Let me roll it back.
Even though Mike has
Matt Glantz.
I think one of the interesting things is how she handles her chips. She handles her chips so slow and leisurely here, and plays with them a lot more, which is just something I only saw her do in one other strong hand she had. I didn't see her do anything like this when she, was bluffing. And I think this is just a clue of how she's just so relaxed here. Just notice she's just kind of playfully riffling her chips, not doing the usual very standard thing she was doing.
It looks like he wants to get away.
I'm going to say, though, that even
Matt Glantz here.
Even though
Dentale finally flopped top pair.
Even though Mike has not played well today, he has run exceptionally card dead.
Yeah. I really think he's going to get away from this.
They're just kind of caressing
He
your
really
chips,
wants
not
to.
really doing
How?
much productive with
He
them, which I
shouldn't.
think
Game theory says no.
that's generally going to be a sign of somebody who's
But
relaxed.
he's
You got it
looking
again,
for him.
Caitlin?
Assuming they usually do one thing, This is all based on having watched her do the same thing in many hands. And so when somebody deviates from their usual MO in big bet spots, it's usually a sign that they're pretty relaxed.
He's not a game theory player.
She's like sighing and looking around.
Yeah,
Seeming
the
impatient.
question is if he calls, does she slow or not? Say, I just have a king. Your ace is good.
That would be funny. That would actually be hilarious.
That's what I mean. If I'm in Kate's spot here, I'm like, how am I going to slow roll this hand? I can show a king and actually I'm trying.
She's cracking her knuckles a few times.
That's too much, Kate.
It's all this weird stuff. She's taking a drink.
You have the king of spades. He doesn't have flush draws. I know you know he has an ace. Just bet him out and then get him to the river.
All just adds up to.
As a live pro, what are your thoughts on the mid hand water drink? Does it mean she's thirsty?
She's. I don't know. She hasn't drank much during the match at all. But I would rarely think someone's bluffing if it's the first time they're willing to do that.
Oh, so you think it's strong?
It's a comforting thing, yeah.
Yeah, see, I don't entirely agree with Deeb there. I actually did a study of a bunch of videos where players were taking drinks from televised events and made a video out of it on YouTube. And my conclusion was that you see a lot of bettors taking drinks in all sorts of spots. Whether it's bluffing, value betting, or whatever. There's just so many factors. On one hand, a bluffer might want to look like they're relaxed by taking a drink, but you also got people who are actually relaxed and taking a drink. So I think it's pretty hard to say. I do agree with Deeb that the first time you see somebody doing something like that, when they've otherwise been quite stoic, is a sign that they're probably relaxed. And that's what we see here with Kate. She's doing a lot of things here that she didn't do in other situations, right? And one of the reasons this is meaningful is that it's such a significant spot, with almost action-ending potential here. If Mike continues, if this was just a normal $1,300 bet, it wouldn't be that big a spot. If Mike had more behind, it would be a more normal spot, and I wouldn't feel as comfortable drawing these conclusions from this. But because if Mike continues, it's a big hand, so I think her behavior is going to adhere more to somebody who's making a much bigger bet, right? So if this was a more normal spot, I'd still feel confident that she was relaxed, but I just wouldn't feel as confident as I do here because she knows it's a significant spot.
Okay.
Licking her lips. Look at that. That is, yeah. She has not made this many
Flipping the
facial
chips.
expressions any hand.
I talk about chip flipping in the newest book and some videos where just riffling chips is one thing. Lots of people riffle their chips, like Kate usually did in this match. Lots of people do that in lots of spots, but the other more playful actions of flipping chips or bouncing them or whatever, these kind of more playful some people call them gravity defying behaviors because they're kind of more upward and more indicating some levity, some relaxation. Flipping a chip is a very playful thing that you just don't see from bluffers very much, and I had one instance I talked about in the book and in a video where Martin Stashko from the 2011 WSOP main event, there was one really big hand where he flipped a chip after raising over and over again, a bunch of times, and it was the only time he did anything like that in the whole match. I was watching it pretty carefully, and when I saw that, I was like, oh, he's got to be strong here, and he had a full house. It's just when you've got people who are usually really stoic and they do something quite playful, that can be a pretty big sign of relaxation, just because of the past behavior.
That is true. I'm learning slowly.
You're never going to go with them, but...
I'm never going to go with him, but, I'm still learning some stuff. But, what I would do is, it was really close, I might use something like that. If it was a hand, either way. I might use some stuff like that, but only in close situations. Shout out to the real Jesse J. DP, your community. What's up, man? Bazam. Drop some Bazams in the chat.
Some people are asking if the river is an ace, Mike Dentale would not win.
This is kind of funny, her laying her head on the rail. I mean, that's just such an extreme, unusual thing to do at this point. Like, if I wasn't sure before, I'd be, like, very confident that she was strong here if I saw that. I wrote about a similar thing in I think it was my very first book, maybe, where I bet and got raised, I think, and the person put their head on the rail. And I was like, this person's never going to do that when they're bluffing. It's just so weird. And that's what she's doing there. If you ever see a video of somebody making a decent sized bet and then putting their head on the rail when they're bluffing, send it to me, because I've never seen it. That's a pretty weird one, if that were to happen. I'm sure it's happened, but I've never seen it.
Win, he would just have 3 of a kind, and Cate would have a full house. So that's why there's a check mark in Cate's name. Mike Dentale has no card in the deck to win.
Which is not where you want to be.
Well, you do want to be just in Cate's shoes, not
Sorry,
Doug.
for Mike.
Sorry, Mike's.
These guys are pretty funny, I think. So he's going to shove.
Kushnator 420.
What'd he say?
All in?
Call or all in?
Call.
Game over. Wow.
Okay, so yeah, that was that. Summing up, I guess, I was really surprised by just how many tells there were in this. I was surprised because I thought that they would be much more stoic or balanced with the behavior if they were going to be doing unusual things, but I think I was mainly just really surprised by how much this stuff adheres to the general meaning, the meanings that I think they mean anyway. I think it really fits with a lot of stuff I say in my books and videos. So that was surprising to me, just in the sense that there was so much of it and there were so many spots where it all aligned very well, and you didn't see much trickery or weirdness, deception or, there was just a lot more spots than I thought. And I would have expected it to be like 90% stoic and with a little bit of banter from Mike that was balanced and not so obvious. But, wasn't like that.